and welcome to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio, or indeed email the show at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and first up to join us is one of the most respected thought leaders in PropTech, Nikki Greenberg, founder of Real Estate of the Future, coming to us from New York via Australia. Nikki, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to join you here today.
Well, I'm delighted because, Nikki, I've described you and your title as founder of Real Estate of the Future, but you are, of course, founder of Women in PropTech, which is a global movement that I'm very proud to be part of. So you've been involved in this sector for as long as I can remember, from the start, but certainly your background is more on the traditional real estate. So look, you might just talk to us about how you came to get into PropTech and the route that you took.
Absolutely. And you're right. We do know each other, particularly through the Women in PropTech movement, and also with yourself being an advocate for innovation and PropTech around the globe and for promoting your market. We've come into, we've run into each other a few times. So I'm always happy to connect with you. I suppose, my personal journey is, as you mentioned, I'm very much from the real estate industry, having studied architecture and worked in it for a number of years before shifting into real estate development, working particularly on large mixed-use communities, anywhere from house and land to shopping centres, retail centres, etc. So, I come to the PropTech and innovation scene very much as a real estate person, in understanding that we have an industry that's been very slow to innovate, but we also have an industry that affects people. We all live in buildings. We all work in buildings. Buildings are huge polluters. So the more that we can embrace technology and change, the more impactful that we can be. So, my personal journey, as I said, coming from the real estate industry, particularly in Australia, working in it for a number of years. And then I moved to New York about 4 years ago. And it was in New York that I was really exposed to the PropTech and innovation scene. And I was just completely enamored with the types of people and the great thinkers and the incredible smarts and creative way of thinking that people had. So I made it my mission to get to know the different players and the different technologies and the different solutions, and really immerse myself within the New York and what subsequently became the international PropTech scene. And in doing so, I wanted to connect with other people and subsequently built the Women in PropTech network, because I wanted to network with others in the industry. And it was an absolute delight to bring, more like-minded women together to understand what's happening in the industry and share their insights and connect from all across the world. So it's been a bit of a journey, and I always encourage people who are not familiar with PropTech and might be from traditional real estate to remember that this is quite a young and emerging field, which means that it's still early days to get in and to start getting a grasp of what's happening. And you can still be one of the first to really, pilot and embrace the changes. So it's a bit of a mindset with the types of people involved in it, but it's for everyone. It's very creative, it's very exciting, and absolutely brilliant people and technologies from around the world.
Nikki, that's so great to hear you being really positive about, and I agree with you, by the way. I think it's more mindset as opposed to the discipline from which you come. So, you've come from a real estate background, but actually what we saw in terms of early stage founders, they don't all come from a real estate background. So when you were introduced to this emerging scene in New York, were you meeting people who were coming primarily from a technology point of view? Were they coming primarily from real estate, or were they people who had experienced, were they property consumers who had experienced problems and wanted to try address them?
A complete mix of all of the above. My preference with meeting founders is meeting founders that actually understand the unique problems of real estate and then coming up with solutions for it. And I'm going to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but I am being quite serious. I'd so often meet a young founder saying, my origin story is that I was trying to find an apartment. It was so difficult to find an apartment. Therefore, I built a PropTech around it. I'm like, yes, I've met hundreds of people saying the exact same thing. Whereas when I meet real estate people, I will say, listen, I've worked in asset management for, 15 years of my career, and there wasn't a good solution. So I built something that I understood, and now the industry's adopted it because I'm actually solving a problem. Which is my preferred, my preferred founder story. Obviously, a lot of bias being a real estate person. And then the third category of getting, the tech people coming in, they bring a beautiful breadth of experience in terms of understanding technologies and the possibilities from outside of the industry, and then understanding where the industry needs to head. In those circumstances, when I'd meet up with them, they often wanted to learn more about real estate itself. So I think for anyone coming from a tech background, you really do want to be able to meet and understand the needs of the real estate market, get people on your team that understand real estate intrinsically, that goes further beyond just the day-to-day dealings, because the industry is huge and the problems lie deep. And the more that you can understand, the real estate industry, the more powerful you can be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about needing the deep understanding of real estate. One of the things that I found certainly in the Irish marketplace, going back 5-6 years, is that a lot of the founders, a lot of this emerging sector wasn't industry led at all. It was very much consumer led. Again, the story that you were telling, somebody who had a negative experience and knew that this was not the way that people want to consume property in all of its guises, and actually set about a solution. But actually, unless they partnered really with somebody from the real estate or were able to tap into that real estate knowledge, they just failed to get traction on the ground. And I don't think, by the way, that there is a right or a wrong way to do it, because I think that if you're very deeply immersed in real estate, you can be blind to the problems. You just see it as the way things are. So, I think that there's a good balance required. And that's why I actually love when I see technology-led startups. And actually, while it might sound like that's the obvious solution, I would say that technology-led startups are actually in the minority in this sector. But I think that they're the ones that tend to do this really well because they understand the importance of the customer experience. And I'm not sure traditional real estate really prioritized service and the customer or even consumer experience in the way that technology people do. So that's part of the coming together that I'm really excited about, because it's really improving the overall real estate offering, whether it's from residential or commercial. That's where I see the real value. But you've come from a background where you've worked across a number of different sectors. So, and you mentioned there specifically retail. I suppose from your position in New York, but also working with this global network, Women in Proptech, where are you seeing retail trends in the context of COVID and beyond?
Oh my gosh, you really ask the easy questions, don't you? But you did phrase it in the right way. It's COVID and beyond. Look, retail's interesting, and it's been on, bricks. I'm going to say something, then I'll shoot myself in the foot, and then I'll put it another way. Retail's interesting because there's been a decline in physical retail assets for quite some time. Why do you need to go to a bricks and mortar store when e-commerce is on the rise? However, then we flip that over, and then in recent years we've seen online retailers asking to have a bricks and mortar presence. So from one way to the other way, and then of course now we come to COVID, and talking to the US context in New York in particular, the physical retail has suffered quite a lot. However, it's also suffered disproportionately. And what happened is that when we went into lockdown, essential services could stay open. Now, within essential services, obviously doctors, nurses, ambulances, etc. However, certain retailers also had exemptions, such as your Walmart, Home Depot, Bed Bath & Beyond, which are huge retailers. And what they needed to do actually is to have a greater convergence of their physical and online presence. So what you're actually starting to see now is there was an increase, and I believe the number is by 43% of online retail for these traditional brands. But what they're also needing to do is look at their physical locations and think about, how does your physical and your logistics work together? What is that synergy? So there's a hell of a lot going on. in that regard. I always say that whenever there's a deep-rooted problem, as we know there is right now, because there is a high, high rate of vacancies for retail and also for retail high streets. Obviously, when you have retail high streets vacant, it upsets the city life and the ground floor life of communities. So we don't want to see retail fail. And then you have the malls sitting empty. Some of them having a change of use towards procurement, logistics centres, and so on and so forth. And of course, not to leave them out, there's Amazon, who are absolutely huge and growing by the day, and they are leasing huge properties all around the globe for logistics centres. So there's a lot of change that's happening in the retail sector, especially as it relates to retail properties. There's a lot of problems. And what I always remind people of, and I love to say, is that when you do have big problems, then there's an opportunity to have big solutions, which means innovation. So again, for your listeners that are coming from PropTechs and that are coming up with innovative ways of doing things, retail is in such a state of flux. It's a great time to come in if you can identify problems and provide solutions, especially if they're elegant, if they're working with existing systems, if they're very easy to use so that it's not a huge change management issue, then you're going to be sitting on gold because there's big problems to solve.
Nikki, I love the way that you phrase that, because there is absolutely the big opportunities lie in big problems. And I think that's a fantastic way to say it. I can't let you leave. I can't end this conversation today without asking really what your expectations are. And by the way, in the context of where we are with COVID, I realize that, it really is much too early to even talk about the impact that this pandemic has had on real estate. But maybe if we could just hone in on some of the more short-term trends that you see are likely for this sector in, 2021, what are you expecting to see over the next 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, look, it's early to be talking about some of this stuff because we didn't expect that we'd be going through a second wave or third wave for the States really, or that it would be dragging on for so long. There's a few trends that we are seeing. The extent of the length of the trend is going to be questionable. From a New York context, we've seen a huge departure from the city. We have record high vacancy rates for rentals, which we've never seen before. People moving out to the suburbs, to Connecticut, to Brooklyn, etc., which are commuter towns, essentially. So from an office standpoint, what we're seeing is more local hubs being set up in those areas. Of course, commercial real estate is suffering in a huge way. The most recent number I heard was that there was only a 15% incidence of people returning to the office, and obviously there's a flow-on effect. Now, commercial real estate's not going to disappear. People will come back to the office. But the extent to which they will and how quickly is, a question mark. And there's definitely, as I know everywhere around the world has been having the same conversation, to what extent do you need a physical office and to what extent can people work remote? So I'm a big believer in flex space. When there's an environment of uncertainty, pass the uncertainty on to another provider. So I do think that flex space will be able to provide that spillover space that commercial tenants need. Retail, we've discussed, logistics centers, even before COVID, they were on the rise. And actually in the New York market, they were the highest performing asset class in 2019. And that's been the trend for quite some time. So that's definitely going to continue. I think it's a very difficult time for the sector. There is going to be a lot of properties changing hands. There is going to be a lot of movement. There is a lot of stress. There is a lot of anxiety around what's happening. But I do like to remind people that fortunes are made during the downturn. See this as an opportunity to position yourself well for the future. Be positive, work well with your teammates, collaborate. We will all get through this. We can really just make an effort to build a better future on the other side of this, because there's an opportunity to make some really significant and impactful changes right now.
Nikki, that's so well said. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted that the final word we have on this is collaborate, because you're the epitome of collaboration in the industry. And I think it's the key to unlocking a lot of the potential that lies in this industry as technology and real estate merges. That was Nikki Greenberg, founder of Real Estate as the Future. Thank you again for joining us, Nikki. I always learn so much when we chat, and I enjoy our chats. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email the show at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So I'm now joined by Stephen MacDonald, a partner at the Proptech Connection. So Stephen, you're very welcome today. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Sydney in Australia.
Okay, and obviously your accent tells us that you're not from there originally. So Stephen, well, first of all, how long have you been in Australia?
This is my 8th year.
Okay, and the accent hasn't waned. We like to see that. So, Stephen, the Proptech Connection, is a relatively new organisation, but you've been really involved in the emerging PropTech sector since the start over the last few years. So you might just tell us a little bit about your own background prior to the PropTech Connection.
Yeah, for sure. Qualified as an accountant with PwC in Scotland, and then went into a venture capital fund straight from there. And then there we looked at renewable energy or sustainable technologies across Europe. And a lot of them are actually in the real estate space. So there was dynamic insulating in walls, and then kind of solar panels, that kind of thing. I then moved to Australia and ended up in a role where I was working for one of the large REITs down here. And that role was looking at ways they could actually bring in technology to improve the performance of the portfolio. So I was looking at the residential portfolio. So I looked at automation of transactions in terms of settlements. I looked at ways they could do better construction techniques, various things. And anyway, as a result of that, I ended up being asked to join a venture capital fund down here, which invests primarily in PropTech. And I was investment director there for just over a couple of years. And then, as you said, founded the PropTech Connection.
Very good. And so you're coming from this, not just from the financial background, but you've actually been a PropTech buyer at the very early stages for the REIT that you were working for. So actually, in terms of your position when you were buying in PropTech at such an early stage, first of all, were you only looking at the Australian market, or were you actually exploring international solutions?
We were quite agnostic. Like the company I was at is a company called Mirvac, and Mirvac's, to its credit, had quite an open lens. They were looking just to solve problems. So we had technologies, obviously, domestically, but we saw a couple from Singapore, and then maybe a couple from America as well.
Okay, and in terms of some of the solutions that were being rolled out, because obviously that was a number of years ago, there was technology that maybe didn't fall under the label of PropTech, but we were just starting to see this huge drive towards sustainability. And I think ESG was only coming on the radar at that stage. In terms of the motivations of your employers at that time, was it in terms of cost savings? Was it the reputational benefit? What was driving this move towards technology?
It was a number of things. Like you touched on ESG there, but another kind of recurring theme was health and safety. And it's actually a very good point that you make there, Carol, is that we were looking at ways, as I say, to improve the ROI in our portfolio. So we're then very kind of focused on that. And I think some of the PropTechs I've seen haven't quite made that leap yet from kind of quantifying the benefits of their solution into that world for a buyer like the I was working for. So I think in terms of the solutions, it was ESG, health and safety. But then we were looking at things like using data to improve the construction business, but also maybe buy better in terms of acquisitions across, because they were a retail, commercial and residential owner. So there was various technologies, but they were coming at it very much from a portfolio, like a very financial metric view, which allowed us to explore a number of technologies.
Yeah, and I think that that's quite a common theme across this industry. And in fact, it was one of the primary criticisms of new entrants into the prop tech sector, which is that, maybe there was a disconnect between technology that was cool and certainly had the ability to be transformative, but that maybe wasn't going to be solving either an immediate or a priority problem, or it just wasn't going to be able to show the return on investment over the short or even over the medium term. And there seemed to be that disconnect. And I think that you've rightly identified that. So I suppose that leads us quite nicely into the PropTech Connection. You might just explain to our audience what exactly the PropTech Connection does and what it aims to do.
Sure. As you're well aware, Carol, given the position that you hold within the European industry, there's a lot of money and noise in the space. And what I felt with my time having been a buyer of the technology and then an investor and partnering up with people that have set up PropTechs is that there's actually a gap in that market in terms of connecting everyone together. So there's a lot of people trying to integrate it, and the problems that you identified there are very real. And my personal belief is, unless you've been on every side of that kind of transaction, either from a buyer, investor, or the vendor of the technology, it's very hard for you to then penetrate into certain areas. So what we've then set up to do is we've then said, well, let's work with the funds and let's work with the buyers of the technology and understand it from a commercial problem, given that's where our experience is. And then we'll flip that round and then go and hunt and source the technologies that fit that problem for them. And because we do it from that way, we're not then restricted from a geographical basis. We're then able to explore globally, which is why we've then set up a series of venture scouts who are then able to work with us in sourcing technologies. And then we share on that, the return on that journey.
Okay, very good. And you and I had a conversation over the past month, and in this conversation, one of my primary goals for that conversation was I was frustrated with the VC ecosystem in Ireland and for Irish startups meant that, beyond the 500,000 that is supported by state and then matched funding, really growing beyond that, most good startups in Ireland need to look outside of Ireland. Now, the lucky ones only go as far as London, so they can actually retain an Irish company, an Irish base, and maintain their family connections and things like that. But actually, that's not the situation if we look at other jurisdictions there, in terms of if people are going to the US for funding, irrespective of whether it's the East Coast or West Coast or indeed Canada. And these are genuine problems for startups here in Ireland. It's not just actually the ecosystem in terms of funding is not as well developed. We don't have some of the measures in place that would actually encourage further investment. Now, there is a change promised. There's a review of our funding ecosystem there in place in our investment ecosystem to make it more attractive for investors both in Ireland and outside of Ireland to invest in to invest in all startups, technology or otherwise. But we're not there yet. So I reached out to you to see if there was maybe opportunities for Ireland-based. And I say Ireland-based because what we're seeing at the moment is that the startups registered in Ireland are not necessarily Irish, but that they are choosing Ireland. So they're coming maybe from Eastern Europe and they're choosing Ireland as a base, particularly in the context of Brexit. They're choosing to be in Ireland to start up. So, Stephen, what I wanted to know, because obviously coming from a selfish point of view, we want to promote PropTech startups in Ireland. The VC and money is one side of it. The other side of it is access to international testing environments and pilot projects that might in turn become early customers. Is that a realistic proposition that you can offer, that you can make available, that you can facilitate?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, if you're looking to do a large commercial building in Sydney CBD, you're probably not going to get a proof of concept that easily, particularly if you're not located in the region. However, where I think there's real scope for that is, obviously PropTech's very broad, but maybe in the construction space or maybe in the residential agency space or even the broader agency space, which has a higher number of transactions. So because there's that velocity of transactions, people are willing to take a greater risk, because actually the risk of something failing in that environment is far less than if you put sensors into a commercial building, which is worth $400 million. So I think it depends on the technology, and it probably depends on where they are. Like I feel sorry for a lot of the startups in the prop techs in the prop tech industry, because they are developing some great technologies, but because of the lead times and the quantums involved, some of them are just too early. So that, in a roundabout way, to answer your question, I think it's very dependent on the technology, but there is opportunity there if you project it in the right way.
Okay, well, talk to us then about the initial offering from PropTech Connection. So say, for example, a deep tech innovator goes to you with a concept. For example, we know that the most immediate wins in 2021 are likely to be pandemic responsive solutions for building,
Right.
how to make the workplace safe, whether it's contactless, voice technologies. There's a whole range of contactless technologies that are likely to go from novelty to necessity. People are actually going to need it, as opposed to, it being some positioning tool in a REIT, to make a contemporary building, to elevate it to another level. So suddenly we're seeing this shift in technology. I presume, or I'm assuming, that we're going to see that shift from the buyer's perspective. Has that started to happen already?
In terms of embracing the technologies for COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. But also in terms of prioritizing what needs to be, prioritizing what needs to come first. So whether it's making the workplace safe, how to do that, likely contactless, something that can promote and ensure social distancing, and it's not just about making the workplaces safe. It's about the perception of it, that your employer or that your team feels safe to return. That's a huge psychological element maybe that hasn't been touched on. And actually technology has a role to play there, because it's not just about making these buildings safe, because in a lot of ways that's already been done, but it's actually about convincing team members that they're safe to the point that they'll want to return. I mean, is this something that's on the buyer's radars at the moment?
Yeah, very much so, and it's in their interest to return. And you raise a great point. I don't think we've actually explored the liability issue in terms of staff going back on at the behest of their employer and should something happen to them. And on the technology front, it was actually a really interesting experiment, because you saw a lot of companies spring up and say, look, I've got a contactless solution, or retina scanning, or overlays into hot desking, or whatever it may be. But speaking to a buyer recently, they said that actually a lot of these technologies couldn't be taken on from a compliance point of view. So there's a standard called GS007, which REITs have to abide by. And then beneath that, your testimony now, I think it's ISO 20071. And that basically means if you're a listed company, you have to have all your technologies comply with this. So these kind of dynamic startups set up these technologies, but because they didn't comply with that, a lot of the large REITs couldn't take these technologies on. The second thing you saw with the COVID response is that a lot of it's actually almost nullified by the lift restrictions. So because you can only get, in Australia, I think it's 4, irrespective of the size, but people in the lift, actually getting that through flare of people in is actually really difficult. And there's 2 main lift manufacturers down here, and a lot of the technology companies are quite young. So for them to then take liability for running the lifts is a huge risk. So in terms of your question, yep, there's been a lot of response to it. Some have succeeded, but there's actually some natural barriers in that field which have meant it's been very difficult to implement those technologies.
Okay, and actually the natural barriers, particularly in terms of compliance for technology providers selling into REITs, I mean, that's a really important one for people to be aware of. Where do you see the opportunities, over the next 6 to 12 months?
There's still, you've got to split it into different sectors. Retail's very, very open. If you can demonstrate traffic going back to retail, which will then have a knock-on effect in rents, there's a lot of aspiration for that. Construction's still quite raw in terms of its usage of data, and I think a lot of governments is going to use construction as a way to build out their economies. So I think there's going to be work there. Commercial is where it is. Like I think commercial is definitely the toughest space, COVID or not, just because the lead times, the portfolio sizes, but you are seeing companies starting to embrace technologies rather than just bringing it itself. So they're the main areas for me. What do you think, Carol?
Oh.
Is it the same up in Ireland?
Well, I see construction since 2015, 2016. I've been an advocate for PropTech across the entire planning, construction, property, and the entire ecosystem for the life cycle of the building. However, what I'm seeing at the moment, the most opportunities are definitely on the construction space. The more interesting technologies are coming out for the construction space. And in fact, we've seen a shift in Ireland where the number of innovators selling into the construction as opposed to property, that balance is starting to shift. It was only the minority selling into the construction, and that's growing massively. But what I'm seeing on the property or the real estate side is more a consolidation. So where we had early innovators offering solutions 3, 4, 5 years ago, the premise of those solutions are now being rolled up. They're being plugged into other solutions for a more frictionless, seamless offering. But what we're seeing is the individual innovators maybe are losing out. The individual innovators aren't. They're failing to get traction on their own. So actually, that what that tells me is that the real estate sector really needs everything packaged in a neat little bow. They're not good at trialing new technologies. They're not good at being able to isolate problems and apply solutions. It needs to be done in a very holistic way. And that's a really difficult thing for any emerging sector to do because it's quite disjointed by nature. So actually, one of the things we've been encouraging our PropTech startups here to do is where they're solving one problem, to coordinate and incorporate with another startup that's maybe solving another problem, to work well and to come in and introduce as a package, because actually that's what the buyers on the real estate side of it want, as opposed to the construction side. With construction, I've always found them to be savvy operators where if you can show a return on investment, the margins in construction are so tight that if you can show value, then you're likely to be given an opportunity to trial. So they're much more open in terms of testing environments. That's the experience in the Irish market anyway. But I tend to agree with you that construction is where I see the most immediate opportunities, that and of course the pandemic responsive solutions for tech. But it will be interesting. 2020 has been a very unpredictable year. We don't have any reason to believe that 2021 is not going to be just as unpredictable. So it will be an interesting one to watch. And obviously, Stephen, will stay in touch with you through the PropTech Connection, because following on from our conversations last week, we are, of course, hopeful that we will be able to funnel some Irish providers through to you that will be suitable for testing environments and indeed early stage customers, and hopefully that will lead to some nice funding opportunities as well. But early days.
Yes, no, indeed, Carol. And look, I don't mean to be pessimistic. There's still a great bit of appetite across, primarily Asia where we are. But just quickly on the fund side, there is a lot of funds that are willing probably to take a greater risk, as long as you're able to position that idea or that technology in a clever way, so that there's a lot of money to deploy. So if you position it right, you should be okay.
Very good. Okay, that was Stephen MacDonald, partner at the PropTech Connection. Stephen, thank you for joining us today. We need to take another quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Now, continuing our international PropTech theme, I'm delighted to be joined by one of my favourite people in PropTech, and that's Alfredo Diaz Araque Moro. And I hope I've gotten the pronunciation right. And Alfredo is the founder of Spanish PropTech and also works with well-known PropTech here in Ireland and internationally, Spata Home. So, Alfredo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be with you and in Ireland with thanks to the radio. Because as you know, I'm half Irish, because I've been in Galway in 2010 for 3-4 months learning English. And I'm very happy to speak in Ireland. It's like my second home.
Alfredo, your language is great, but your maths are not great. Your mathematics are not great, because you cannot live here for 3 or 4 months and be half Irish. That's a quarter Irish at best.
Okay, yes, maybe. I prefer to language than maths.
Okay. Well, did you enjoy your time in Galway?
Yeah, I think that's Ireland in general is a good country, good people, very similar than the Spanish people. I think that for me was incredible that the people very warm and always helping to the people in Ireland, that the people that don't speak and is not from Ireland. And I love Ireland, sincerely. I think it's a great country.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We're delighted to hear that. And as you know, I've lived and spent time in Spain, and I would agree with you there. Actually, I think there's huge similarities in the personalities of the people in Ireland and Spain. And I'm sure it depends on what region you go to as well. But I agree. I think there's a lot of similarities there in terms of a family first culture and work ethic and all. So it's something that I've definitely noticed. And look, I particularly want to talk to you about your work. I described you there as the founder of Spanish Proptech.
Mm-hmm.
So I have known you online, and I'm delighted we actually got to meet last year before all the travel bans.
Yeah.
But I've known you online for a number of years now because you've been very heavily involved in promoting really promoting PropTech across all of Spain while you're actually based in Madrid yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about the early days of Spanish PropTech?
Yes, I'm going to explain because a lot of people think that Spanish PropTech is an association, the National Association of PropTech in Spain, or the big community. But sincerely, Spanish PropTech is my personal project because I started to get involved in PropTech in 2015, something like that, and I started to study about how the technology impact in the real estate. Okay, and in this process of learning and talking with a lot of people, I discovered, I figured out that there were a word that was technology and property. PropTech. Okay, I say, okay, yes. that's what I was looking for years. And I decided to start a website that is Spanish PropTech because no one has the name in Spain, and they say, okay, this is a very good moment to take the name. And I started with a blog years ago, and this year, with taking advantage of the lockdown, I launched the new website, and 1 month ago, I started with a podcast about PropTech and digital transformation in real estate in Spanish. Sorry, now in English, I'm waiting for English. I think it's very difficult for me.
No, and actually, I was so excited when I saw that your podcast had launched. And I had to send it to my daughter to listen to because her Spanish language fluency is much greater than mine. So I have some learning to get through before I have a level of fluency that I can properly understand all that you're saying. But I actually tuned in because you had a number of really interesting guests so far.
Yeah.
So actually, thank you. Not only am I sharpening my international PropTech skills and insights, but actually it's sharpening my Spanish too. So gracias.
Un placer. You're welcome.
Good. And so tell me, in terms of, you're very modest to say that, PropTech is Spanish PropTech, it's not this big association, that it actually started as your personal project. But actually, if you speak to most of the founders of hubs, these international hubs right across, not just Europe, but internationally, they all started as one or two or three people's personal project to promote the industry. And in fact, PropTech Ireland was the very same. We don't work on a membership basis where we charge membership. It was very much an entity where we wanted to give back to the community. And so around the similar time that, you and I would have met online through all these PropTech hubs about 2015, 2016, the same thing, we saw that there was, I don't know about you, but certainly for us, we found that there was a great wealth of talent, great innovators and great ideas. And there were definitely big problems in the industry. And yet somehow those two couldn't connect. The people, who were designing solutions and the people who were experiencing problems were just having trouble connecting. And I think a huge part that needed to happen was awareness. And I know that is something you did through Spanish Proptech, because I've read some of the articles that you've written. I've learned a lot of what I know about the Proptech ecosystem in Spain. I've actually gotten through a lot of the materials that you've researched or written or shared. And the education of the traditional industry is a huge part of this. How long were you involved in the traditional industry before Spanish Proptech?
I started in the real estate market in 1999. Before the 2000 and the 2000 effect.
So a long
time ago, yes, a long time. And I started in shopping centers, in the industry of shopping centers. And I moved to, after the crisis, I moved to residential. And my background is real estate. And when I go to a different programs to speak or events, I always say, I'm a real estate person. I'm not someone that is a technological person or something, or someone to start a startup or something like that. No, my background is real estate. And for that reason, my goal with the Spanish Proptech is to teach try to teach humble that to the traditional market, to the traditional my colleagues, that digital transformation is here and we have to move to the digital transformation. For me, it's not important. It's important to teach to the startups how to approach to the real estate market. Of course, it's important, but it's more important that where is the money and where is the problems that it is in the traditional market to move to the digital movement. Move there. And for that reason, I always write about that. For example, don't stop. I think that one of the last posts was, don't stop innovation. Now is the moment to innovate. Please don't stop.
Yeah.
Because of that, because the people, the traditional market say that it's focused on sell properties, in general, or invest in properties or something like that. And digital transformation or all that is implied by technology is not in the core business. And I try to teach or to explain that technology is in the core business in the real estate companies too, and it's very important in real estate nowadays.
Yeah, and look, I think it was important back in 2015 when you started saying it. I think in 2020 when we're living through the impacts of COVID-19, all of these benefits that we've been selling as convenience and these, we're seen in some way as novelties are now really being reinforced as necessities of the business. But maybe we'll just you might just share with us how adoption rates were across the traditional property industry or real estate industry in Spain prior to COVID-19. How were you finding adoption rates across the traditional industry?
I think that it's important to understand that maybe in Ireland you are going to understand me very well, because the crisis stopped everything in real estate, and we started to see with positive view through 2013, 14, something like that. And here in Spain we started to talk massively about Proptech in 2017, and we live a very good moment about Proptech and how Proptech is important, and a lot of companies, the big developers in Spain and big consultancy firms start to talk about Proptech and so the importance of Proptech. Now people is saying that COVID is accelerating Proptech and digital transformation, and I think that what is accelerating is that the people that didn't have the level of Proptech, because, for example, I explained in the last events that I've been, I say, imagine that the level is 1 or 0 is no level in technology, and 10 is the best student. Maybe the average was in 6 in Spain, 6, 7 in technology, but a lot of people didn't reach this level, and now with the COVID, they say, "Oh my God, I don't have, for example, virtual views. I don't have tools to enter in the buildings with apps." All the people that didn't do anything about that, now they are running to achieve the normal level. Okay, it's like the bad student that study in the last the days previous to the exam is the same, and it's not accelerating. Is that the people is reaching the level that is the minimum level. Okay, and in general in Spain we have a very good level in PropTech, and we need to make more. For example, UK is in the top of the world, like USA, and in Spain. Maybe the difference between other countries is that the highest level in PropTech is in residential market. Okay, is where developers and consultancy firms work harder in this level, in this type of assets.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I haven't heard it explained like that. And I think that's a really interesting point, because the same conversation is happening here in Ireland, not just in terms of PropTech, but all technology and digital transformation of all sectors. That COVID has really accelerated this. But I haven't heard anybody articulating that it's only accelerating those who hadn't moved in the last number of years. So then how... Is it having any impact then on people who were leaders in this space? Are they using this opportunity to do more, or are they actually stagnating?
As I told you, one of the problems for me is that the people that was in the cutting edge of the technology, they stopped the technology. Okay, they stopped because
interesting.
Because now they have to. I don't know how do you say maybe in English. I'm going to try to save the box. No. They don't want to spend.
I
don't want to spend more money than they need. Okay, and they say, okay, we are going to cut. And the first part that they cut is marketing and maybe technology. And it's technology because they don't understand, as I told you, that technology is part of the business. Okay, and they decide to cut. It's true that a lot of people, as I told you, start to use apps for buildings. Or maybe start with the virtual viewings, etc. But these are the people that didn't do that. Okay, the leaders continue with technology, but not in the same level that's previous to the COVID, because now they have to focus on maybe sell houses or rent spaces for office, or or focus on disinvest in some activities that are not in the core business. Okay. They are focusing in other ways of the business life, and they don't see as technology as part of the core business. I think that we have to change that. I remember in Paris, Brendan Wallace, the manager of Fifth Wall, said that in the future, in his opinion, in the future, real estate and digital companies will be the same. And I think that is the idea that we have to keep in mind. That technology will be part of us, and real estate will be technology. And because
I think you're right. And in fact, I think if the whole PropTech movement and push that we're seeing this decade is successful, by the next decade there won't be a sector of PropTech. It would be almost like having a sector of computers being used in real estate. It will be so ubiquitous that every transaction will be frictionless online, that artificial intelligence will simply be one of the tools we use when we're reporting. It'll be a simple reporting tool. So I agree with Brendan Wallace of Fifth Wall there. And I think that if it's successful, that's what will happen. But we've spoken there about your work through Spanish PropTech, but as I mentioned at the top of the show, you're also involved, and while you've described yourself as a traditional property and real estate person, that you are actually working with one of the leading PropTechs at the moment, Spot a Home. So, and Spot a Home, as you well know, was in Ireland for I think about 18 months, and they closed their doors. They were one of the earliest casualties of COVID-19. I think, would it be fair to say they closed back in April, maybe? Or yeah, it was so very early. So, can you talk to us a little bit, just so we can get into specifics, about Spot a Home? Because I know at a time Spot Home actually had one of the largest number of employees for a Proptech company in Europe. So at what level was the
Okay,
team?
I'm going to explain because, for example, I think that the measure that we made and the board of management in Spot Home took in during this month, I think that there was the correct decisions. Okay, why? Because previous, and I think that it was something that WeWork started. I think that when WeWork tried to go to public with the fail, a lot of the investment funds and the market in PropTech say, okay, maybe it's not a good thing to grow massively every month. The most important thing in a PropTech startup is the efficiency and profitability. Okay, and maybe COVID accelerated that, and a lot of startups in PropTech in Spain, and I think in the rest of the world, start to say, okay, we have to make a big effort in profitability and efficiency. And for that reason, we made a lot of decisions that is hard to take these decisions, but it's for the living of the company, okay, and for the living for the workers. And for that reason, we decided not close maybe Dublin, but just the office, and now the people from London is running the office, the Dublin market, and at the same, for example, in Brussels is the people is in Paris is in charge of Brussels. And it's a way to make profitable, because it's what our investor asked for that, and I think that it's important, and it's a very good moment, and it's a logical movement for the startups. Because I think that we were crazy about growth, and burn money. And it's not fair for the rest of the market that we are going to burn money and not profitability. And it's important to understand that the startups have to be profitable.
No, that's a very fair point. And it's something that, look, in terms of startups, we know that 2020 has been such an unusual year, so in terms of funding, what we're seeing, the overall figures, if you look Europe-wide, they don't tell the full picture. So what we're seeing is that there has been an almost consistent, although slightly reduced level of investment in startups. However, when you drill down into those figures, we know that most of that investment is going into already funded companies to keep them going. And actually, there's very little happening. There's very little investment for first-time funded companies. And so I think your point is well made there. There has to be limits to how quickly a startup can grow. If it's not matching its burn, its burn rate. And that's something that really we saw so starkly through the whole WeWork saga, that really brought that home, that, there needs to be a different approach. And I think, COVID-19 has been a test for all businesses, whether they're startups or long established, or whether they're traditional or very high tech or cutting edge. It's been such a test. I suppose before we finish up, what are you seeing now? Now that we're approaching 2021. You mentioned before we came on air that Spain was in lockdown. It's about to go back into lockdown for about 14, 15 days to almost prepare for what's likely to be, increased activity over Christmas. And by the way, Ireland is the very same. We're still in lockdown at the moment. There's an expectation that we won't be in lockdown over Christmas, but there's certainly an expectation that it's very likely that, we may end up back in lockdown after Christmas. So how do you see 2021 shaping up for the PropTech industry in Spain? Are there pockets of opportunity still left, even if COVID persists?
I think that making a little bit of history here in Spain about PropTech, etc. I think that, for example, in the first years of PropTech in 2014 or something like that, what the real estate market need was information, and a good information. And for that reason was the time for all the big data, analytics, machine learning startups, okay, in PropTech. Now is the moment from low touch economy, and try to avoid the social distance, okay? I think that 2021 will be the year for IoT on all the startups that give solutions to the market to solve the problem that is the social distance, and to be and to have the right people in the office, and etc. Okay, and in general, I think that it will be a very good year for this kind of startups, because they are giving a solution for a problem that the real estate market has.
I think it's interesting. I agree that contactless is absolutely going to be one of the driving forces, and all of that is powered by IoT and the connectivity of smart buildings. But I think what's interesting is that that's likely to accelerate the growth of voice technology. And that's something that last year that was predicted to increase massively, yet it didn't happen. So it's interesting that actually I think voice technology is likely to be one of the leading areas of technology now in 2021. And, and that would means it would be true that COVID-19 is actually accelerating trends that we had already seen, because actually I remember back in maybe 2019 or early 2020, voice technology was going to be, was going to increase real estate searches. It was going to be how we organized information. It was going to be how we reported issues. And yet it didn't happen. But now it actually might happen. Yeah. It's an interesting one. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. That was Alfredo Diaz Araki Moro, and founder of Spanish Proptech, and of course working also with Spot a Home. Again, Alfredo, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to get some insights from the international markets, just to deepen our understanding, because Ireland, of course, is a country, a small country. It's an island, and we're so dependent on the wider ecosystem in Europe and beyond. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. That's it from us in Property Matters today. Thank you for listening in on Dublin South FM. And you can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio, or by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Also, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound, and show producer Katie Talon of Hear Me Roar Media. We're back at the same time next week. From myself, Carol Talon, and all this team here, stay safe.